Hello friends, welcome back to our channel Mirror Neuron, which means watch and learn. And today we are going to solve the daily coding challenge 3, and where the question was given a list of values like this, right, where you have zeros and ones. So here we have 7 values. The question was, what is the minimum number of jumps you would need to travel from the first position to the last position, and you are allowed to take one jump or two, oh sorry, you are allowed to take one or two steps, right? Okay, let's not confuse between jumps and steps. Okay, so the first jump is where you took one step in, you made a first jump, then you took two steps and you made the second jump, you took one step to the third jump, and then you took two steps to complete the last one. So you basically made three, and then you took two steps, so you completed this in four jumps. Okay, now there could be other arrays or list of values like this, where you probably can take three steps, four steps, or five steps, and so on in order to solve this. But what you need to find is the minimum number of steps. Okay, and let's see how we can solve this. Okay, so in order to uh, count the number of jumps, we first need to know how can we record these jumps. What I mean by that is, so I'm writing the array once again, and I will write them little bit wide apart so that I can make some notes as well. Okay, so programmatically, how can I count these steps? So whether I take one step, here I took one step, here I am required to take two steps because I cannot fall into this one, then I took one step again, okay, and then I took two steps. So the ones written in blue are the steps that I took, and the jumps I can count is one, 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 and one. So I basically took this many steps, but total number of jumps was four. Okay, now in order to do this, we of course have to travel in this particular array in a loop, right? And in Python there are several ways to run a loop on a given array. The common examples are for loop, which we are very frequently use, and then we have while loop. Of course, there are other looping techniques which we will not jump into, because in our case we can demonstrate the solution by using one of this. Okay. All right, let's quickly see the difference between for loop and while loop. I'm pretty sure that you are familiar with it, but in this context of solving this kind of challenge, we have to be very particular about whether we are going to use for loop or we are going to use while loop. All right, so we are very familiar in programming language that we can take an increment of plus one whenever we move from one position to another position like this, right? Okay, now the challenge that we will face if we use a for loop is that, first of all, let me write the syntax, a typical syntax that you will use in Python. So we'll say for I, and say this array is defined by L is equal to, so for I in range, right, this is how you typically write a for loop, and we'll pass the length of this array, right? And we will what we will do is we'll set follow some statements, right? We'll run some statements which will basically implement our logic. Here is the problem in for loop, and let me, before I tell you the problem here, let me also give you another clue, is that in solving this kind of problem, what we need to do is we need to jump our index position not in a very fixed way, right? So sometimes we are going to take one step, sometimes we are going to take two steps like this, right? Then probably we'll take another single step, and then we'll take another double step, and so on, right? And here we followed a pattern of one step, two step, one step, two step. But this is not necessarily true for other arrays, right? So and also say we have a different array like this, right? And it can be something like this. right? So we can take single step. We have to take a single step, then we have to take a two step, then we take a single step, and then we take two steps, right? So in such scenarios, right, uh, the problem is we cannot use a for loop. The reason being, I'll write it again: for I in range length of L. I hope you are following me. And what happens is, in for loop, I in this particular problem statement, I should be able to modify this I during the runtime. During runtime. But in for loop, before the loop starts, the I value gets assigned. Okay, gets assigned, and we cannot change it during runtime. That is the problem. And that is why, we are going to use the while loop, because in a while loop i can I can be changed, right, in runtime, because we have to take single steps or two steps. We don't know at what point of time, and that's why we should have a flexibility to be able to modify this I value. And that is what the reason we are not going to use for loop, but we are going to use a while loop. Now that we know we can use a while loop, let's see how we can utilize it. Now, coming back to the point, a very basic notion is, before we make any jump, our jump should be actually equal to 0. So basically we need to have a variable which will keep a track of how many jumps we are taking, right? I'm not talking about steps. I'm not talking about steps. I'm talking about the jumps. Steps are 1 or 2, right, at any point of time. Jump is how many jumps we took. And each jump can have either one step or two steps, right? Just to clarify. Alright, so we need a variable which will keep a track of it, and I gave a name as jump or jumps, whatever you want to call it. Okay, and we are going to use a while loop, but here we should not give a 0 here, because in Python eventually when we start our position from here, say 0, this was our original list. Okay, before I do anything, my jump should be not equal to 0. That means it is below 0. That means we can give a value of -1, because we haven't done yet anything. And the first jump or step I would take is come here. That means that is my starting position. So eventually I will have to increment this variable jump with 1. So I can come to jump equal to 0 when I start moving from here. And that is the reason why I'm going to use a variable jump equal to -1. So basically I'm initializing my first variable as -1. So let's do that. So I'll use my first variable jumps is equal to -1, because later on I'm going to increment it and make it 0 to mark the first position. Okay, now how to write my while loop. Okay, so while I'll use a variable I, and it is less than length of L. So basically I want to run my counter till the length of this array. Okay, so it will start from here and go until my last value. Okay, and it should complete before that. Okay, this loop is fine. Now what should I do internally? Okay, what I want to do is I want to count my jumps. Okay, so basically I want to count my jumps like this. Right after my while loop, I'm going to say jumps plus equal to 1, because I want to count whenever I move. Okay, and how much step will I move, that is what I need to control. So every time I make a move, I should count it, and that's why I have this statement. Okay, and now my next condition will figure out how much this should change. Okay, now a very simple logic, because I'm allowed to take one or two steps, so I can move, so I can be +1 or 2, right? But in a while loop, technically whenever it makes an increment, it will make an increment of 1, because that's what I can control. So that means whenever I have a situation like this, that means I can take a single step and I take a two step here. So here plus one step plus two step. I can only by default I gets incremented by one anyways using the while loop because it's inbuilt. So I don't have to increment it by one, rather I can increment it just by one again, because 1 automatically comes from this while loop, and I can add 1 whenever I have to make it 2 steps, and here I don't have to do anything, it will automatically increment because that's how while loop anyways works, right? Okay, let's clear this. So I'll write it again. Your jumps equal to -1, and then you have your while loop, while I less than length of the array and jumps plus equal to 1. And another important point is, till what position in the array am I should I be considering, because my array, say it has 7 element and I'm allowed to take 1 or 2 steps as I just mentioned, so I should be actually taking into consideration till 5, right? Because if I come to 7 and then I try to increment by 1 or 2, what will happen is it will crash because there are no more elements left. So we are going to consider our steps till the -2, the total length -2. That is the first condition. And I also need to check whether my last value is equal to 0 or not. In that case, what will happen is I can conclude if my last value is 0. Okay, so what I can conclude is that I have reached the end of the array. So these are the two conditions that I need to meet. So how can I write it? So I can say I less than length of L minus 2, and then I need to check the value. So I will pass L I plus 2, because when I'm on the 5th position, if I add 2 positions here, that means I'm reaching the end of the array, and I want to make sure this is equal to 0. So that means I have two conditions. One is the length is -2, the steps until which I am going to consider this is -2, and my final value, this is I plus 2 equal to 0. When these two conditions meet, then what I am going to increment, guess what? Just take a guess, or you can pause the video to think. I am going to increment I plus equal to 1, because this is what is counting my steps. Okay, here I took care of the jumps. Here it is automatically getting incremented whenever I move, but this position I can change, which I can control with my logic, which is done here. This was not the case in case of a for loop, so technically I can do this while loop. And also, while running a while loop, we have to increment the counter. So this I is the counter as well, so I have to increment that counter. So I can additionally write a 1. Also in while loop, we have to initialize a value of 0. I is equal to 0. Now these steps are important, otherwise your while loop will not work. Okay, so when I put this all together, and I want to show you the code as well, and it's loading up. So you can see my code here, and you can see that my jumps is equal to -1, I is equal to 0 is required for initialization in while loop, and the remaining logic I have already explained. And this, when you run it, it will give you 3, because 3 is the minimum number of steps that you can take in order to move from the first index position to the last index position. And I hope you liked how we solved this and how we thought through, and this is how you're going to actually sit down and think different possibilities, because even somebody taught me when I was first trying to solve this kind of problem. Somebody actually explained me the difference between a for loop and while loop using such examples, and this is the time when you actually learn. Otherwise we keep learning about for and while loop, but we never know what is the context. I hope you liked it, and if you really like our channel, please do subscribe, and we will be very happy. Thank you very much, and I will post the daily coding challenge for tomorrow. Till then, you have a great day.